engaged in several issues. Our approach is pluralist rather than universalist and based on Guru Nanak's worldview. During colonialism, and this is important to bear in mind, a number of Indian philosophies and worldviews were pushed into the bracket of religion, so they lost their relevance in the public sphere, and hence they all were marginalized. I mean, it happens with most invaders. When they go there, the first thing they do is they take the local custom and culture and put it in the bracket. Anyway, there is a lot in 5,000 years of Indian philosophies that is of relevance to us today as well, and including in our worldview. There's incredible concepts, wisdoms, and solutions which would be relevant to our many problems in the world today where there are conflicts going on. We think that defending and promoting inclusion of diversity through a regime of rights is necessary, it's essential. It has led to many minority groups and diverse communities enjoying parity in the state. However, the problem arises and continues because the majority of society may not be comfortable with the diversity. See, it may tolerate rights and enforce equality, but may still harbor prejudices and discriminatory attitudes in private. We are not born with prejudices. When we are born, we don't have any prejudices. We acquire prejudices, we acquire discriminations as we grow through the culture and through the politics around us and through privileges that surround us. So we can address discrimination through the law, but also through change of culture, ideas, and positive action. So we think that a complementary approach to encourage society to be accepting of diversity would help the Durban Declaration, would help dealing with discrimination simply on the basis of law. So it can be beneficial. It will not replace the rights regime, which is important, but it will complement it. A UN Declaration on Diversity would be useful as an intention by states to make diversity inclusive in the state. It is different than the UNESCO Declaration on Cultural Diversity, as it incorporates more than culture, such as systems of governance, biodiversity, and plural worldviews. So today we have a panel of eminent speakers who have been engaged in proactive approach to making diversity integral in various aspects of their countries. Not all speakers could make the trip due to the short time in organizing. I have to tell you that we are live streaming here. If there's any objection, we can stop that, but then we can just live stream the speakers. Does anybody have any issues? No? Good, excellent. So we have our Excellency Ambassador of Bolivia. The Ambassador was going to speak in person here, but had to go to Bucharest. Unfortunately, the plane on coming back has been delayed. So we have a representative from the Commission of Bolivia who will be answering any questions. Would you like to say anything?
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm the Ministry Council of the Commission of Bolivia. Indeed, actually, the ambassador unfortunately had our last visit. That's why she is here in person, but she has been in the video, so we will really play it. I will try.
We have translation in Spanish to English.
Someone has to be.
We have been trying to practice the technicalities of the system. Hope it works today.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, that's a bit. Thank you. So te l'altro ya está. Sí, vale, così tu e basta.
Okay. Unfortunately, technology is not universally system diverse, whereas it should be politics which should be diverse. So they're trying to get it working. So I'll introduce Maury Hawkins, who was in the Department of Communities and Local Government in the United Kingdom on the big background.
The speech of
After the 2001 riots in Northern England, there was a decision, there was thinking within the Home Office in the United Kingdom that some communities do not engage well in a very secularized system. And then laws are introduced, and sometimes those laws are seen as adverse by them, and then they resort to their campaigns, sometimes demonstrations, etc. So there was it was a very, I think it was an ingenious thinking, it was a positive thinking. They set up a faith communities unit in the Home Office in Scotland to engage faith communities. So it included Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, all faith communities, and we were normally shown, we had meetings every few months to express our concerns, and when there were new laws that were being introduced and policies being introduced, they were shown to us, and we could go and consult our communities and fine-tune it so that when the law was, or the policy was finally enacted, it did not cause any tensions. Mr. Hawkins was, I think, the third person in there. The first person who started, there was another person, and then he was the third person in there over to charge of the department. So we did advise his experience.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. As someone who was raised in South Africa and partly in Wales, I would also say Goeienacht middag and Bedankt daar, which are two languages which I shouldn't pick up often there in the United Nations. As Dr. Rai said, he and I have known each other for over 20 years. When I was a civil servant, he and I were sort of sparring partners, you could say, so it's good that at last we're on the same side. So let me start off by giving you a bit of history of how the UK government has engaged with faith communities specifically. And then at the end of that, I'll hope to pull out a few lessons that may be of interest to all of you as we embark on this important subject we're talking about this afternoon. As Jasdev said, I ought to make it clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of the government of the UK now. I believe the policy has continued in essentially similar form, but I'm not authorised to speak on behalf of the government of the United Kingdom. So please understand I'm speaking only from my personal experience. So to start a little bit with the history then, you should know that in the United Kingdom we do not have any system of laicity. That's a subject which is completely, or a concept which is alien to us in the United Kingdom. We've always had a state religion in the United Kingdom. It's the Church of England, which means that the UK is in a group of countries that you can probably count on the finger of two hands, which has a state religion. And the Church of England, in that role, has always had a part in the formulation of policy making, especially in areas of interest, basically to itself. And for instance, policy on the control of church lands and this kind of thing. And there are bishops in our upper house of Parliament. Or whether that's a good idea or a bad one, I'm not going going to explore at this meeting. Around the 1960s, the government of the day began to realize that it was important to consult other groups as well. So a system was put in place for consulting all the churches of the United Kingdom on legal issues, policy making, implementation of laws which were of relevance to them. But that was only the churches and the office of the chief rabbi, but there was no attempt at that early stage to engage with the fact that even by the 1960s, the United Kingdom was a diverse nation or a family of nations. And it was really only at around the time of the millennium, in the late 1990s, and I was around at the time, so I remember this, that the government of the day began to feel it would be of relevance and important to consult other faith communities as well on the development and implementation of policy, for two reasons. One, there was a recognition that, as I say, it's a diverse nation. Parts of the United Kingdom are now hyper-diverse, and that there are cities where no particular nationality or faith group or ethnicity is in the majority. It's kind of a succession of minorities. So A, it was felt important that ought to be recognised in policy making, but also began to be recognised that faith communities inspired individuals to public service. So it was noticed that whether it's church communities or mosques, Gurdwaras, very actively involved in supporting their local communities, and that the government of the day felt that it was important to begin to take account of that. So the initial, if you like, excuse for it was the celebration of the millennium, which was a religious anniversary, and so it was felt important at that stage to consult with faith communities, and there was in our festivities in the year 2000, there were a number of activities of a multi-faith nature as a result of that. In '97, the government changed to the Labour Party, and as Jasdev said, also there was a number of riots in parts of the country in the early part of the new millennium. So this consultation began to happen in more of a formalised way. So one thing that was assembled, I think, in 1998 was the Faith Communities Consultative Council, FCCC. This used to meet every quarter. I was the secretary of it. Our minister, in the United Kingdom, we have a minister of faith, which is a thing you don't have, I think, in many countries. He or she has other roles as well, but the Minister of Faith would host the meeting, chair the meeting, and we would have representatives of all the faith communities around the table. Now, you can immediately see that entails a problem, which is how do you identify who the representatives ought to be? There, as Joseph said, within the United Kingdom, we have Muslims, we have Sikhs, we have Hindus, we have people of Jewish faith, others as well, and an individual might come forward and say, I can speak for the whole of that community. Is there any way of establishing whether that is in fact the case or not? Nevertheless, the government made a decision that it would consult on that basis. There was an inner faith community consultative council, there was an outer network, highly formalized, and it did some important work. Just to give an example, there was a pandemic of influenza in about 2003, and the faith, the FCCC, as we called it, was able to involve the faith communities in formulating the guidance in places of worship, how to prevent the spread of flu. There was another example was airport security. where individuals who had religious headwear on were at that time expected to basically take it off at the airport, which was highly unsuitable and indeed offensive for many of them. And so we were able to put in place a system of handheld scanners at the airport, which meant that that no longer had to be the case. So it produced some good work, and as I think its culminating effort introduced this, which was a guidance for the government, for all parts of government, on how to engage effectively with faith communities. Understanding that faith community organizations are staffed most of the time by people who are volunteers, who haven't got much time to get involved in this kind of thing. If you allow enough time, you often have to make resources available. So that was an important piece of work. Alongside that, our team was advising our ministers on engagements. If they went out to visit a mosque in their constituency, or they had the meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, we would advise them on the agenda, on how to respond to individuals' issues to raise, and so on. So it was an important and interesting time. We had a unit, hardly a department, but nonetheless it was a unit of 12 of us, civil servants, that was exclusively engaged in this work. Then things began to change when the government changed again, and this is one of the points that I'd like to make, maybe at the end, which is that whilst there have been informal and more formal means of consultation, they are impermanent in the United Kingdom, because a lot is dependent on the minister who is coming in, whether they're interested in this issue or not. So there was a change of government, and the new incoming administration felt that this was too much of a talking shop, was the expression that was used. The Faith Communities Consultative Council was abolished. It was replaced by a much more informal system, whereby you would individuals within the different faith groups who are trusted interlocutors, they would be, bring them up and ask for a view on something, but it was much less of a formalized structure. So that is really the history of how we've consulted the faith communities, and I think the model after after 2010 is still in place now, which is a much more informal sort of consultative structure. Now, I haven't spoken about other areas of policy, hate crime, extremism, because I'm particularly talking about engagement on policy making. And as I say, that has carried on even up to the current moment. But I would just make a couple of observations in closing, because I know that I'm in my time, which is that it had positive advantages in that, the fact that the United Kingdom is a diverse country has been recognised by succeeding governments, and consultation has taken place. On the other side of the coin, it's dependent on the will of ministers, largely on institutional history within a department. After a couple of years, the civil servants leave, and then you have to start all over again. So I think I shall leave it there. I'm happy to answer some questions later.
Thank you very much. So you saw this is one form of where you make diversity inclusive rather than waiting for tensions in the public. I think our video system is working here.
I think no, fortunately not.
Sorry for that. The video is important, so you may and
Yeah. Bolivia has a very interesting national constitution, and
thank you so much, and thank you again for inviting us to this event. And here we have the presentation. If I may, I will switch to Spanish. Thank you so much. Muy buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Desde la segunda mitad del siglo XX, Bolivia ha transitado de un estado nacionalista revolucionario a uno neoliberal. Sin embargo, recién a partir del 2006, Bolivia, a la cabeza del primer presidente indígena, Evo Morales Ayma, empieza a construir un nuevo proyecto societal y estatal que se discute en el seno de una asamblea constituyente, se plasma en una nueva constitución política el año 2009. Esta nueva constitución establece un nuevo Estado que reconoce, rescata y respeta nuestra diversidad histórica, lingüística, cultural, étnica, institucional, identitaria, civilizatoria, es decir, la diversidad de nuestras vidas y de lo que somos como pueblo boliviano. La nueva Constitución se sustenta en el reconocimiento de un Estado plurinacional, y creo que Bolivia ha sido voluntaria y el reconocimiento de esta figura estatal, y es la primera diferencia base con la antigua Constitución de 1993, que si bien reconocía la diversidad de culturas y de idiomas, definía a la sociedad como pluricultural y no al Estado como tal. La actual Constitución Política del Estado, que tiene la oportunidad de leerla, textualmente cita: Bolivia se constituye en un Estado unitario, social, de derecho plurinacional, comunitario, libre, independiente, soberano, democrático, intercultural, descentralizado y con autonomía. Bolivia se funda en la pluralidad y el pluralismo político, económico, jurídico, cultural y lingüístico dentro del proceso integrador del país. Consideramos que la diferencia central de esta nueva Constitución del 2009, que marca el punto de ruptura con todos los procesos coloniales y colonizantes que definían al Estado de Bolivia, es la definición como tal de plurinacional. No es lo mismo definir un Estado como plurinacional que a la sociedad como pluricultural. I'm sorry, is it working? Sorry. No es una impertinencia teórica ni un capricho intelectual, sino que tiene que ver con la historia real de lo que somos como país. Cómo unir a un mestizo con un aymara, que es un pueblo indígena boliviano, con un quechua, con un guaraní o con un moqueño. Bolivia en la actualidad tiene 36 pueblos indígenas. La pluriculturalidad significa eso, reconocer y convivir entre diferentes pueblos indígenas. La consulta para la creación de una nueva constitución fue precisamente esa: cómo unimos a las diferentes nacionalidades si provienen de matrices culturales distintas. La idea de Estado plurinacional es la solución virtuosa de esa articulación de historia, de vida, de idioma, de culturas que nunca antes estuvieron en el ámbito del mismo gobierno. El Estado plurinacional es un tema de hecho práctico, de realidad. ¿Cómo nos sentamos juntos e iguales, mestizos, pueblos indígenas, sin que ninguna cultura se sienta superior a la otra? Eso es para Bolivia la plurinacionalidad. Este es el primer núcleo del eje del nuevo Estado. Un bloque de poder histórico construido a partir del ensamble de varias matrices culturales, lingüísticas, históricas, que dan lugar a un bloque de poder plurilingüístico, pluricultural. Y ese es el núcleo del Estado. Entonces, este tiene que ser plurinacional. Es un tema de la raíz misma del Estado boliviano. No solamente trae otros idiomas, otras culturas, otras referencias geográficas, sino que también trae una diversidad de prácticas diferenciadas. Por ejemplo, en el tema medioambiental, la naturaleza es viva para el mundo indígena, por eso nosotros la llamamos madre tierra y los derechos de la madre tierra. Mientras que la visión muchas veces que se ha adquirido en la academia y en las escuelas es que la naturaleza es más que todo materia prima de la industrialización. Existen también maneras distintas de practicar la democracia reconocidas en nuestra Constitución. ¿Qué es primero, el individuo o la colectividad? En la sociedad moderna, atravesada por procesos mercantiles, es el individuo que vive en su departamento o en su casa el que toma decisiones. Esa es la manera de entender lo común y lo individual. En cambio, en Bolivia también existe otra fuerza, la colectiva, para sembrar, para cosechar, para regar, para celebrar. Se basa en la preeminencia de lo colectivo incluso por encima de lo individual. Son prácticas distintas, pero ambas reconocidas en la Constitución. Constitución. Nuestra Constitución reconoce la democracia representativa, un individuo, un voto, la democracia participativa, el referéndum como figura democrática contemporánea, pero también reconoce la democracia comunitaria, que antes nunca había sido reconocida por otras constituciones. Por la mentalidad colonizada, nuestros antiguos congresistas asambleístas redactaban la Constitución dando la espalda a la realidad nacional. Podían ser entendidas posiblemente en un entorno europeo, pero para Bolivia no tenía un sustento histórico real. Vivían de espaldas, eran textos que vivían de espaldas a una realidad nacional. Hay asambleas comunitarias reconocidas en la Constitución. Las hay en los barrios, en la comunidad, en el sindicato, y seguirán existiendo porque es la forma de democracia participativa directa que reconoce también esta Constitución. Asimismo, el texto constitucional reconoce la diversidad cultural y que una diversidad institucional y civilizatoria se traduce en cosas concretas, en la educación, por ejemplo. Un porcentaje de los bolivianos y de las bolivianas habla diferentes idiomas indígenas, por ejemplo el aymara, y una mayor parte de la población habla el castellano. Otros tienen el mestizaje de idiomas, castellano-aymara, castellano-quechua, castellano-guaraní. Antes, las personas que hablaban únicamente un idioma indígena, por ejemplo aymara, no podían ejercer su derecho ciudadano de hablar en aymara cuando acudían a instituciones públicas. Cuando iban a la escuela no podían aprender su propio idioma nativo. Cuando entraban a la universidad tampoco, y menos cuando defendían, por ejemplo, sus tesis, no podían comunicarse en su idioma original. Una persona aymara hablante tiene tanto derecho como una persona mestiza, y esto está reconocido en nuestra Constitución. Y eso es lo que es la plurinacionalidad. Es que en la educación se respete la enseñanza, desde básico hasta el nivel superior, en idioma indígena, materno, paralelamente al idioma castellano. Pero además, en cada institución pública se puede usar y es reconocido el idioma indígena, de los diferentes idiomas indígenas reconocidos en la Constitución. Allá, en los lugares donde predomina un idioma originario, la burocracia estatal tiene que aprender, tiene que practicar y tiene que atender la función pública en un idioma mayoritario de la región que paralelamente hable castellano. De tal manera que de aquí a un tiempo, si alguien va a hacer un trámite a una institución pública, la persona que la atiende, el funcionario o la funcionaria, tiene que hablar en condiciones de igualdad en el idioma que la persona hable, el idioma original. Esta es la idea nuevamente de lo que nosotros concebimos como un Estado plurinacional. El reconocimiento de igualdad de culturas, de idiomas, de prácticas de la sociedad a partir de una constitución diversa. Para finalizar, ciertamente somos el primer Estado plurinacional del mundo que colocó esto en su constitución política del Estado. Hay elementos que ya fueron practicados por otros estados en la parte lingüística, por ejemplo, Canadá, Bélgica o India. Pero donde sí somos vanguardistas, al menos en América Latina, es en la igualdad de culturas, pueblos y de idiomas. Pero además, a nivel mundial, somos vanguardistas porque reconocemos varias matrices organizativas, varias civilizaciones, varias maneras de entender el mundo, las técnicas, la salud, la naturaleza, la justicia. Y eso está inscrito en nuestra Constitución Política de Estado. La nuestra es una Constitución del siglo XXI que sincera al Estado con la sociedad y a la sociedad con su Estado, sin complejo alguno. Al contrario, apoyándonos como fuerza productiva en nuestra gran diversidad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry the technology didn't work for the ambassador's speech, but we heard just everything we wanted to, and it's an excellent example where you don't necessarily have to have this one form of constitution, and it could be inclusive. There's a lot of talk about indigenous people, but there is very little action on the ground, and India has shown that we can be inclusive in different systems as well. So we are not going to have press time. We have Professor Kaya from the Center for Indigenous Knowledge Systems at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban. They've set up a very interesting system where Professor Kaya he's actually originally from Tanzania, where I was born as well. And we have the representative of Tanzania here at the
Can you hear me?
He persuaded the South African government that if the modern constitutions that African states are taking from Europe may not be very inclusive and may not work for those countries. And if you want to try and make the tribes and the communities more inclusive, you have to understand the systems and try and bring them into policy. Just as Will Wilkinson said, how faith communities and issues were taken on board, here it's a bit more than that. The issues are the communities and the taken on board, even their governing systems are taken on board with the South African state. So Professor Kaya,
can you hear me? Right, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think.
Can you also see me?
Yep.
Can I share my screen here? Let me try to share.
Let me give you sharing permissions.
First of all, my name is Professor Hassan Kaya. I'm the director of the DSI, stands for Department of Science and Innovation. NRIF stands for National Research Foundation Center of Excellence in Indigenous Knowledge Systems. I'm also the coordinator of the African Institute in Indigenous Knowledge Systems with its hub at the University of KwaZulu-Natal here in South Africa. Good afternoon, everybody. The DSI, Center of Excellence in Indigenous Knowledge Systems, is a partnership of 5 higher education institutions in South Africa. University of KwaZulu-Natal, the hub, University of South Africa, well known as UNISA, Northwest University, Universities of Venda and Limpopo. So the 5 form the DSI NRIF Center of Excellence in Indigenous Knowledge Systems. The African Institute in Indigenous Knowledge Systems is a consortium of more than 20 higher education and autonomous research institutions in Africa and outside Africa. We have colleagues from University of Cairo. Can you hear me? Colleagues, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It's just echo.
Yes. Okay, good.
Carry on, sir.
So I'm trying to introduce what is the African Institute in Indigenous Knowledge Systems. They say it's a consortium of more than 20 higher education and autonomous research institutions within and outside South Africa. We have colleagues also from Germany, Bayreuth University, from South Korea, and also from Japan. I mean, we form the African Institute. So my topic today is for me to share with you the prospects and challenges the African Institute in Indigenous Knowledge Systems, together with the center, are facing in promoting the issues of bicultural diversity and associated indigenous knowledge systems for global social and epistemic justice. As you know, the issue of epistemic justice is a very important question of fairness. So let me see how it goes here. Oh, sorry.
You should have screen sharing options.
Yeah. So one of the mandates we have as an institute, let me see here if am I going down or forward, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah. So the issue of cultural and biological diversity is a very complicated issue in the sense that if you look at the history of the continent, I mean Africa and also South Africa in particular, where the country has gone through the apartheid and the colonial system, the issue of biocultural diversity was a contentious issue in the sense that during apartheid and also during colonialism, in fact, before colonization and apartheid, African indigenous communities lived in a symbiotic relationship between nature, culture, and spirituality. Because based on the philosophy and the principles of Ubuntu, it's an African philosophy which emphasized that there is a symbiotic relationship between human life, the natural environment, and also the spiritual environment for sustainable community livelihood and also for the question of ensuring there is social and epistemic fairness in society. But when colonization came, and in South Africa here, since 1948, with the apartheid system, colonization was fascinated by biological diversity, but not necessarily by African cultural diversity and spiritual diversity. They looked at biological diversity as an asset where you can do maximum profit maximization, but they looked at cultural diversity of African people, including spirituality, as a problem and also as a source of conflict. So there was a disjuncture under colonization and apartheid between biological and cultural diversity. After the democratic elections in 1994, when the apartheid system was abolished, in practice, not much has changed. Although we had policy and legal framework here to promote bicultural and biological diversity, still that disjuncture is still there in practice. However, because of the policy and legal frameworks, the government introduced the teaching of African indigenous knowledge systems. And I'm happy to say that I'm one of the people in 2000 who initiated the introduction of African indigenous knowledge systems as teaching, research, and also community engagement programs. And one of the issues we engaged in teaching and research was the issue of promoting bicultural diversity as part of promoting the epistemic and social justice in the new dispensation in South Africa. But we face a number of challenges and also prospects. And let me start first of all with the prospects, which we face because of the limited time. The prospects of promoting bicultural diversity, contrary to the policies of apartheid and colonization, were based on the Ubuntu philosophy. Ubuntu, as I said before, is an African philosophy in which most Africans lived and still live in the rural and also in other marginalized communities, that you cannot separate culture from natural and spiritual environment. Those is a symbiotic relationship in those aspects, because during colonization and apartheid, by degrading, exploiting biological resources, it also went in hand with the marginalization and degrading of cultural and spiritual diversity, especially among the majority of African people. So what are the prospects we encountered or we are facing when we are promoting the issue of bicultural diversity through the teaching of African indigenous knowledge systems? One of the positive aspects is the fact that we managed to include African indigenous knowledge holders in the teaching and research of bicultural diversity. And that had a very positive aspect in the sense that most of the students find it very fascinating and very important in the sense that African indigenous biocultural resources by indigenous knowledge systems are now being recognized, including African indigenous languages. And by involving indigenous knowledge holders, especially the elders and traditional leadership, because also during colonization and apartheid, African indigenous traditional governance system were marginalized in the colonial systems were introduced. But now we find that you cannot promote bicultural diversity, including African indigenous knowledge systems, without improving the traditional leadership. So the involvement of these community leadership, community knowledge holders has a positive aspect in the teaching and in research, including community engagement, because students from within and outside South Africa who are now joining the program, they found it as a positive aspect. So that is one aspect. Another important prospects we have is the question of digitalization. In that the taking advantage of the fourth industrial revolution, especially among young people who mostly can see and listen, but most of them don't read. By using digitalization, we are able to ensure that they appreciate and they can bring their own creative innovations in the promotion of the symbiotic relationship between cultural, biological, and also spiritual resources and associated knowledge system. And another aspect is a question that by promoting bicultural diversity as for epistemic and social justice, we are able also to promote the multidisciplinarity of teaching and research, because during apartheid and also colonization, which is also a legacy of Western knowledge systems here, the demarcation of subjects, because we believe in African societies, like in other indigenous communities, whether in Latin America, in America, or North America, or in Australia, New Zealand, wherever, we don't live today biology, tomorrow chemistry, the next day political science. Life is holistic, multidisciplinary, messy in the sense that you live in a holistic way. So by introducing and promoting bicultural diversity, we are also promoting multidisciplinarity and lived experiences of people. But what are the challenges, given the time is limited, in the sense that the challenges we are facing, as I pointed out, that now is 30 years after democracy, but still there's a disjuncture between theory, between policy, legal frameworks, and what happens in practice. That disjuncture is still there, that we are trying as much as possible, and of course the government is listening, but we still have a long way to go to ensure that what the policy, what legal frameworks say about bicultural diversity and the importance in sustainable community livelihood, and also in line with the Africa, the Agenda 2063, or building African we want, and also the question of localization of the United Nations development, sustainable development goals. We still have to do a lot of work, a lot of marketing, both nationally, continentally, internationally, to ensure that people understand, appreciate, and also promote this bicultural diversity for sustainable community livelihood. And it's still also another problem in the university management, and some of the staff do not understand the importance of that symbiotic relationship between bicultural and spiritual diversity and its importance for epistemic and social justice. I think I'll stop there because of limited time, so that if you have any questions, you can ask me. Thank you very much for listening. Yep.
Go for it. It should be working now.
Are you able to listen?
We are open all these events almost in every Human Rights Council until we are able to persuade enough countries to introduce a resolution and perhaps the declaration at the United Nations. We already have 3 countries here, and we hope that you will take it on board, that society is a lot more comfortable, it's a lot better when governments themselves take some proactive steps to make diverse communities more inclusive rather than them having to fight on the streets. If there are any questions, we are happy to take them. Yep.
Well, first of all, thank you for putting this together. I find it very interesting, and of course, having been taught by elders in our system, we have ourselves we don't put politics on the top, we put the environment and politics second in the order of our importance for organizing politics, as you might say. But it was very interesting to hear the last speaker talk about and link the culture and to apartheid, because we're trying to get this apartheid discussion, bring it to the surface so that it will be dealt with and not be evaded, because they're currently evading it in the resolution from rhetoric to reality. It's simply not there. Despite that, even in the discussions on the DDPA, the 20th anniversary preparations, etc., it's all part of it. But politically, they don't allow it. So then how do we include this if we're not going to address this? So maybe you could speak about how we could include it.
I think what the problem you've highlighted is what I think a lot of countries are also either lack the competence or the politics doesn't enable them to go beyond what the majority want. So what we are trying to do is introduce in the forums here enough best examples so that other countries can see, yes, it's not difficult. So you've seen how Bolivia's plurinational constitution is very inclusive, and how the United Kingdom was able to include faith communities without saying, oh, we are secular, we don't talk to religions. And the South African case, you saw how Professor Kaya made a very good point that during apartheid, there was biological diversity in the sense that if you were African of African descent, then yes, but there wasn't cultural inclusion. So the cultures were more or less excluded, and how the South African experiment is making them more inclusive now. So I hope that other countries will learn by having a declaration. A declaration is not compulsory. So if countries sign up to that, they introduce this, and you have an annual UN Day of Diversity as well, countries can learn from each other. They can see that other countries have been quite successful in dealing with issues concerning minorities of all sorts or diversity of all sorts. So,
yes, I would also add that I think it's advantageous if minorities are able to bring evidence of how they are able to impact on local issues, offer environmental solutions. If they can produce hard evidence, then the government of a country is more likely to pay attention, I would suggest.
Okay, thank you. Just in order to apply the linguistic diversity, I will switch now to Spanish. En mi punto de vista, creo que efectivamente, o por lo menos en la experiencia de Bolivia, parte de una voluntad política, pero no puede quedarse únicamente, o no puede recaer únicamente en una voluntad política de reconocimiento de la diversidad. Entonces, por eso que la Constitución es tan emblemática y tan vanguardista, porque independientemente del orden político y de los líderes o lideresas políticas, la Constitución va a reconocer la diversidad, ¿no? Y creo que en algunos casos el marco normativo internacional ha permitido ampliar los marcos normativos nacionales, pero creo que definitivamente puede ser también al revés. Y los marcos normativos nacionales pueden dar luces para un reconocimiento internacional de derechos. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. I have a question for the representative of Bolivia. It was very interesting to hear about the multipluralism, multinationalism in Bolivia. But as a quite a legal question, how is it implemented from constitution in like state laws and in the judicial system and the decisions of the courts, all that pluralism in the cases in the practical side of the topics that you have touched? It will be interesting to hear.
Thank you so much for the question. And as you all may know, the Constitution is like the main horizon of the recognition of different rights. But from the Constitution, there are the development of several and different laws that recognize what it's within the Constitution. For example, we have a law that it's called La Ley de Deslinde Jurisdiccional, which recognizes both judicial system, the original indigenous one, and the more classic way to understand justice. So we have a really wide national legislation that help us, or we're trying to implement what the Constitution establishes.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for attending. There's a hot debate going on upstairs if you want to attend that. And we hope that this will be the start of a long journey for Bolivia. Yeah, and we hope to see you again. Please keep in contact. Yeah?